Why, in the 25 years since he and Uncle Billy started this thing, he never once thought of himself. Isn't that right, Uncle Billy? He didn't save enough money to send Harry to school, let alone me. But he did help a few people get out of your slums, Mr. Potter. And what's wrong with that? Well, here, you're all businessmen here. Doesn't it make them better citizens? Doesn't it make them better customers? You said that what'd you say just a minute ago? They had to wait and save their money before they even thought of a decent home? Wait for what? Until their children grow up and leave them? Until they're so old and broken down that do you know how long it takes a working man to save $5,000? Just remember this, Mr. Potter, that this rabble you're talking about, they do most of the working and paying and living and dying in this community. Well, is it too much to have them work and pay and live and die in a couple of decent rooms and a bath? Anyway, my father didn't think so. People were human beings to him, but to you, a warped, frustrated old man, they're cattle. Well, in my book, he died a much richer man than you will.
So, racism exists today in both traditional and modern forms. Racism is an institutionalized, multi-layered, multi-leveled system that distributes unequal power and resources between white people and people of color, as socially identified, and disproportionately benefits whites. All members of society are socialized to participate in the system of racism, albeit within varied social locations. We wrote this before Dr. Bonilla Silva's talk today, but it fits right in with it. All white people benefit from racism regardless of intentions. No one chose to be socialized into racism, so no one is bad, but no one is neutral. To not act against racism is to support racism. Default is racism.
Racism must be continually identified, analyzed, and challenged. No one is ever done. The question is not, did racism take place, but rather, how did racism manifest in that situation? The racial status quo is comfortable for most whites. Therefore, anything that maintains white comfort is suspect. The racially oppressed have a more intimate insight via experiential knowledge of the system of race than racial oppressors. However, white professors will be seen as having more legitimacy. Thus, positionality must be intentionally engaged. Resistance is a predictable reaction to anti-racist education.
The theme of this show, Episode 5, concerns indoctrination of the children. The public school system in the state is engaged in a process that will not easily be undone. In fact, it likely will not be reversed anytime in the future. Parents do not have time to wait for things to get better. In the meantime, their children may yet be exposed to what amounts to unlearning, or the political education of the children, not education as such. The clip from It's a Wonderful Life that we started with for this episode is meant to ask this question. Just what should parents wait for? By the time the system improves, assuming it can be improved, their kids will have had decades of learning that they are either victims or that the nation is evil, usually both. They will also be taught, where we shall see here, that you, the parent, are either too racist in your privilege or too stupid to understand any of their so-called expert training, education, and knowledge. What are your children to them? They are experimental subjects, meant to serve the political interests of the blue and on education establishment. These people will not be persuaded, our education leaders will not be persuaded by any superior or logical arguments about education and what it should look like. In fact, they spend little time speaking of real education, as we're going to see. Because, as they say, all education to this point has been racist. This begs the question of how these mostly white teachers rose above their own privilege. They have a political agenda that cannot be broken until the parents discover alternatives to leave the system. Parents need to do this for two reasons. One, for their children, and two, to decrease their political authority, the political authority of the education establishment in the state. While I encourage people to work through change, through policy and whatnot, to try and save public education from the influences of the woke left, we encourage you to walk away from public education. Parents should be involved in their school boards, political campaigns, and whatnot related to education, but parents do not have time to play with their children's future by waiting for change that will not come fast enough. As the second video notes from 2014, these educators of teachers in our public schools believe that 1, whites are inherently racist, 2, insidious racism is everywhere, and then 3, all whites benefit from racism in the system. As I noted in episode 4, being colorblind and even tolerant is racism. It is not enough to treat human beings equally. In fact, like the segregationists of the 19th century, as you can see from the second video here, that I showed and will show again here, another part, racial preferences are preferred. You will notice that our educators' ideology wants to coerce action. That is, if you do not actively reject the equality of human beings equal in their rights, in their humanity, in their souls, it is to participate in a systemic racist culture. These are despotic intentions to force people to believe something untrue. Notice what the second presenter said. Racism must be continually identified. This means that your school system is looking at not just the kids, but you, to identify potential racism to be eradicated. And that means if you do not support their agenda and admit you are a racist or that you benefit from your whiteness, and you might even say from white thinking, you are a part of the problem. And any objection is resistance that must be addressed, as the second presenter said. Now, I've got something I want to show here as we pull up this conference, and you'll notice here that this is a conference from 2014 on race and pedagogy. These are teachers who teach the teachers. So this is what they are teaching in school, and so when your teachers get a job and they come to... Let me find this and then I'll stop it.
Right, we use...
Okay. When they teach your kids and or teach teachers and come to school, they are being influenced by this sort of ideology. They come with this sort of wrapped up in their educational practices. So I wanted to play one more part here, and it's about a minute long or so. So this is the continuation of the first video that I showed on the introduction. Here we go.
Phrases like attack, right? That reinforce this idea of people of color as inherently dangerous and spaces in which they're in as inherently dangerous spaces. And so just because of time, I'm not going to go on, but I could really like to kind of deconstruct that. And I've written about it if you want to read that. So I'm not seeking to create a safe space. I think that's actually highly problematic. And so I also don't affirm everybody's opinion. That's another kind of sacred thing, right? Like, hey, everybody's opinion counts. Well, actually, I would say that it doesn't when some of those opinions are misinformed and oppressive, okay? So everyone has an opinion on race and racism, right? Have you ever met anybody that didn't? And all white people that I've ever known have opinions on race and racism. And I'm going to say something provocative. If you have not spent sustained attention, study, and practice on race and racism, and you're white, you necessarily are ignorant about race. And that is because it's not possible for you to gain an informed understanding of race and racism from mainstream society. You have to seek it out, and then wherever you got it, everything that's outside of where you got it will conspire for you not to maintain it.
So you got that? If you haven't thought about it, then you are what you would call a moron. I guess you could say. I think what was interesting about that part was, and we're going to see this already. We're going to see it in some of the websites we're going to go through today. That they are not tolerant. They're not tolerant of differing opinions, as you see. And as a matter of fact, they're not interested in creating a safe space, quote unquote safe space, where you can voice your opinions. Certain opinions are going to be heard, and other opinions are going to be shut down. Now, this is from a website on critical race theory, which is basically what we're talking about in this episode, kind of an extenuation of episode 4 a little bit. But this is hit home a little bit, as I'm going to show you. in just a few moments. But this is for social work, of course. However, there is a particular part here that, and this is recent, April 2020. There's a particular part here that racism is endemic. Racism is endemic and ordinary. The first proposition, racism as endemic and ordinary, rejects the notion that racism can be abolished through meritocratic and legal remedies because it's necessary for the maintenance of the U.S. socioeconomic structure. You just stop right there. Now they have references here, but none of this really matters. References don't really matter actually in higher ed. It matters to them a lot, but in reality, a reference doesn't mean truth. It doesn't mean anything really. What matters is the argument. And the argument they're making here is that no matter what remedy has been applied, so if you follow their logic out correctly here, the 1868 Civil Rights Acts, any of the Civil Rights Acts, any of the acts having to deal with sort of allowing people equal access to goods and services, for example, or equal access to public works, parks, etc., is immaterial. It doesn't matter. It doesn't address the question. So you'll see here that the critical race theory people believe that we need something more than the legal. And as a matter of fact, they are looking for our assent. So if I could go on here, therefore, racism is a component of what is considered natural and ordinary. Remember in episode 4, I said you can't get away from it. It's systemic. In other words, racism functions to justify inequitable distribution of resources between minoritized and non-minoritized groups. Consequently, racism is not defined as a psychological benefit or individual character flaw. Rather, it is embedded in the fabric of our institutions, policies, and practices. Therefore, it creates a social structure that reifies and reproduces advantages for these categorized as white and disadvantaged for minoritized groups. Accordingly, Fagan employed the word systemic to define the nature of racism in the United States. Systemic racism is all-encompassing form of oppression rooted in subjugation of African Americans, in which every facet of minoritized, I just love that word, person's life is dismissed and undermined. Systemic racism then is the root cause of disproportionate access to resources. Well, I guess LeBron James is suffering under it. And actually, you know what? That's the case they have to make, and the case they do make. So I point this out again as a reminder to show you that racism in this country, they're saying this, is systemic. That means the entire structure has to come down. There's no other way around it. I mean, that's the logic of what they're saying. So if we look at if you're interested more in this, I wanted to bring up something here. This is Lindsay's website. He's great if you follow him on Twitter. He's got a beginner's curriculum to critical race theory, and I've noted a few things here. And as a matter of fact, that's where I got that video. I believe it's all the way down here somewhere under videos, where those ladies were talking about critical race theory, really. Chris Rufo, and this whole big introduction here, plus the monologue, has been to get you to Chris Rufo here, who spoke very recently. This is March 17th, 2021. Subversive education. Notice we're talking about North Carolina now. And in particular, we're talking about the Wake County Public School System, which, of course, serves the greater Raleigh area. And he speaks here. There might be a little bit of, I'm going to go to his Twitter feed here in a minute, where he has some quite nice graphics, real graphics, from the Wake County Public School System, which, should be alarming to you. That and in what they're actually trying to, I wouldn't call it teach. I would try to, I guess I would say force our children to learn. But anyway, the teachers conference. So these are teachers in the public school system, in the district school system, probably mostly, all of them, more than likely, to engage in sessions on what whiteness means, what microaggressions are, what racial mapping is, disrupting texts. And by the way, we're going to see that as a theme. They believe that they should disrupt. I mean, education now is about disrupting sort of norms in society. And they're going to teach your kids this to do that. As a matter of fact, I think there's one picture, if I can find it here, it should be in one of my tabs up here, that you'll have a child with a bullhorn. That's fabulous. They are encouraging educators to form equity teams in schools and push the new party line anti-racism. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time on what the term equity means. It does not mean equality. Where you read the Declaration of Independence, which speaks in terms of our equality and our natural rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, equality of human beings, equity means you can be racist in order to set an equal outcome. Okay, you understand? So if you were looking at some of these critical race theory people and noticing that, you know what, I think that since they want us to see color first, which they do, that's the definition of racism. Well, that's what equity means. Equity means to sort of work things equitable for the category of victimhood that they're after in order to have an equal outcome, whatever that outcome is. Does that mean then that they can engage in racist practices to achieve that equity? The answer is absolutely yes. And you'll see this here in Chris Rufo as I bring up his Twitter thread here. A lot of this in the Twitter thread is also noted back here in his piece in City Journal, Subversive Education. So he takes this is the long form of it, and this is the Twitter version with a little bit less writing but more graphics. So North Carolina's largest school district launches a campaign against whiteness in educational spaces and encourages teachers to subvert parents and push ideology of anti-racism directly onto the students without consent. The public school system, which serves the greater Raleigh, North Carolina area, held a conference on whiteness, toxic masculinity, microaggressions. I'm probably doing both of those right now. It's toxic and microaggressive right now. And trauma-informed yoga and also applied critical race theory. I want to bring up some of these graphics for you of the session. You can see here that they're very concerned about whiteness in educational spaces. Right here, equity teams, how to start an equity team, which, again, I have to add, has nothing to do with equality. And as a matter of fact, they believe equality is racist in itself. Teaching real history. And then here's our disruption part that I talked about before. They're talking about disruption texts, and they'll talk about how to disrupt, actually, society in a way. At least that's the goal. The applied critical race theory here, I think, this is important. He's got another graphic here that will reinforce this a little bit, but you can notice here the centrality of whiteness. White ideology, values, and interests are the center of all aspects of dominant culture and policy. Now, they do two things here, and they're not very good at explaining the logic on it because there isn't any that I have found, that you can be white and have a centrality of whiteness in your mind. So that would be, I guess, me. But if you are of any other color, if you are African American, if you are Asian, if you are a Latino, whatever, a Latina, then you could have a mind of whiteness, you see. You could have those values. So if you've ever heard somebody call, say, a black person a white supremacist, this is why. Because they have a centrality of whiteness in their thought. So thought is being policed now. So challenging the dominant ideology, I'll leave that. And again, all this stuff will be posted in the links where you can also like, subscribe, comment, and hit the notification button. And all of our social media links will be in there as well. But teacher bias is hidden. There's institutional bias. Inequality is reproduced regardless of individuals. And the next part here, let's see if I can find it. Oh, yes, it's down here. This is, let me read this first, though. The conference began with land acknowledgement, recognizing white North Carolinians are colonizers that stole Native American land. You know, and it's very interesting. The symbolism here should be quite shocking to you, or at least you should just make a note of it as remarkable, which means it's worthy of remark. Once again, equity. We're not interested in equality, and the symbolism of the fist, which has nothing to do with education, folks. This has nothing to do with education. The rising fist has everything to do with power and political power and the exercise of it. Now, to get to tie up this part back here that I brought up here are these two graphics from the conference. Okay, so this is what was distributed around, and people were talking about in Wake County. School administrators claim that white cultural values, including denial, fear, blame, control, punishment, scarcity, one-dimensional thinking, white teachers must challenge the dominant ideology of whiteness and disrupt white culture. So you can see here are some of the, I guess, characteristics of whiteness. If you believe in hierarchy, if you believe in dominating your own space, personal space, I guess, is gone, that there's only one right way or one right perspective. If you believe formal education is the best to affect knowledge and children, if you believe that time is scarce, okay. If you blame, interrupt, threaten, have bravado, apparently only white people can have any of these characteristics. And so you see here that the norms of whiteness then are fear, rush, you know what's best, control, punish, predictable outcomes. So here you have the what they want to replace all that with: infinite possibilities. Defying gravity, I suppose, on Earth is one of those infinite possibilities. It's interesting, isn't it, that the education system is teaching this stuff to children. And I think I'm going to let Tim Pool here probably end on this today. But as Tim Pool said, this is not just bad teaching for white kids. It's bad for minorities. I mean, it teaches them a certain thing, which I'll let him drive it home for you. But it doesn't empower anybody, and it certainly doesn't encourage people to rise above. The district claims that the parents, now this is a point that I want everybody to make sure you digest, because you might say, this is just what the district is doing. It's not really a big deal. They certainly don't want to come in between my child and my student. Well, by the very fact that they are teaching the way they're teaching now, they do want to come in between you and your child. And Chris Rufo here has a document that they state exactly that. The district claims that parents are an impediment to social justice. So if you look at this is from the conference. What do we do with parent pushback? It was a question asked. White parent children are benefiting from the system. Systemic racism. Right there, right? If you're white, you're benefiting. You must acknowledge your racism, okay? But if they don't, they are perceiving that they are going to lose something, the fear of loss, hard to let go of their power and their privilege. In other words, parents who push back should be disregarded, okay? And they should keep going and keep doing and keep teaching this stuff to your kids. So, here's the statement on that. Again, considering the parents, you can't let parents deter you from the work. Mission statement, preparing students for their real world, I would say. Some students learn within the school about the real world due not to learning at home, but about diversity, LGBT, and race. So in other words, what they are learning from home, if their parents disagree with them, the teacher knows better than your parents, and they have to indoctrinate the children to believe a certain way, even if it goes against parental authority. So it's undermining the parents' sovereignty, if you will, over their children and their children's education. and they're claiming that they have sovereignty over it. Okay, I mean, we should make that clear. Once again, this is from Wake County Public Schools. So in Wake County Public Schools, you're going to run into this. You're going to run into something like this in the district. Okay. The first person to break this story, by the way, wasn't Chris Rufo. It was the Lady Liberty, AP Dillon, and this is her website. I'll make sure I post it for you. But she has a couple of more links here that Chris Rufo does not. And some of those are to links to the website of the Wake County Public School System and some of the people that they're sponsoring and supporting in this conference that went on. Here's the Wake County Public School System website that she linked to. It's still up. It's kind of hard to believe. They are out in the open about what they want to do, and they believe that peace and justice and truth encourage this. So I wanted to pull up this. It's a very, very long, involved website, but I wanted to at least pick up the official statement on racial equity. Once again, equity is not equality. We're beyond equality now. We're in racial preferences. So we encourage each of you to use this moment of history to strengthen your commitment to achieve racial equity, racial intolerance. This means working to address the injustices that exist beyond education. See this? So they aren't interested in educating. They're more interested in stuff beyond normal traditional terms of education. Why? Racial equity. Why? Racial preferences. So by the conversations we have with others, by speaking up when we see hate, by supporting efforts that oppose racism and oppression, by directly engaging in advocacy. So teaching is now more, it's not even teaching anymore. It's instruction. It is instruction in advocacy. Wake County Public School System Statement on Racial Equity, June 2020, wants their teachers to be activists. This is a part of Equity for Wake. They were also there, and one of the websites that they link to here is Fostering Civil Discourse. I'm not going to go through that because of the interest of time, but I did want to highlight this little piece. These people, Learning for Justice, are on the Wake County Public School site. They're supported by them and supported by them in terms of, I'm not sure if it's monetary, but I do know it is at least rhetorically and on their website, and this is what they have to say.
Hi, my name is Jalea Lyles Dunn, and I'm delighted to introduce myself as the new director of Learning for Justice. You likely know us by our original name, Teaching Tolerance. 30 years ago, when our program was founded by the Southern Poverty Law Center, its goal was clear: eradicating hate by fighting intolerance in schools. Celebrating diversity and promoting content theory were key to that early work. And focusing on the difference one teacher could make, we offered resources for creating classrooms where all children could thrive. Over the years, even we have admitted that tolerance was an imperfect term. We justified our name by applying the term broadly, saying no single word quite captured the range of solutions needed to create a fair, equal society. And we're proud of the work we've done. But our approach and our work have evolved, and our goals have shifted as well. We know that justice is the heart of what we want for our young people and for society at large. Since our work began, we've expanded our focus. Our social justice standards bolstered our celebration of identity and diversity with attention to questions of justice and strategies for student action and collective action.
Okay, so there's a couple of things here. You'll notice, first of all, tolerance is gone. Teaching tolerance is gone. Why is teaching tolerance gone? By the Southern Poverty Law Center. That's who these people are, and they are working with the system at in Wake County, in the Wake County Public School System. Tolerance is gone. What's left? If tolerance is out, intolerance is in. And you'll note here that they believe in active action in schools. And there's nothing wrong with diversity. There's certainly nothing wrong with that at all. True diversity. But this is something beyond that. This is preference. So these are preferences. The next thing I want to a little bit on this here is if you don't subscribe to Jack Murphy Live, I mean, it really is a great. He does a weekly podcast, and He has quite a gathering of fellows that he does to market his own what he is doing. It goes beyond education, and Jack Murphy used to be in charter schools in Washington D.C. That sort of went away. But I want to highlight here a little bit from Christopher Rufo.
Enemies, but
Exactly.
my focus lately has been looking at these issues in K through 12 schools, and it's truly horrific. I'll just give you some examples for people who are listening and say, well, critical race theory, it's just a theory. It just says that we need to look at race as a lens to understand American society. But this is how it works in practice. In Cupertino, California, they're forcing first graders to deconstruct their sexual and racial identities and then rank themselves according to their power and privilege. In a middle school in Springfield, Missouri, not exactly a blue state, they're separating teachers between oppressor and oppressed, telling white male Christians that they are inherently the oppressor class, and then telling women, people of color, and sexual minorities that they are inherently oppressed and that they all suffer from covert white supremacy. Or in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where they're taking fifth graders, forcing them to celebrate, quote, black communism, and then having them simulate a black power rally to free Angela Davis from prison, where she had once been held on murder charges. That's what they're doing in Philly. And then in Buffalo, New York, they've created a Black Lives Matter mandatory curriculum stating that, quote, all white people perpetuate systemic racism. They claim that white wealth is derived from slavery, and whites are, quote, unfairly rich. They even have a lesson for kindergartners where they show them a dramatization of dead black children, warning these 4- and 5-year-olds that they could be murdered by, quote, racist police at any moment. This is the expression of critical race theory in practice. This is what happens when you take a bad intellectual idea and then you digest it and reformulate it as school curriculum. It's not only shocking and morally wrong, but as Carlin pointed out, these things are also violations of the First Amendment because they compel speech that violates students' conscience. They're a violation of the 14th Amendment because they traffic in racial hostilities that target one group on the basis of a protected category. And they're also a violation, this is the great irony, they're a violation of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, especially in public schools. You can't traffic in racial stereotypes, you can't assign collective guilt to people based on race, and you can't create a racially hostile employment environment. So this is what's happening in our public schools, and I think Corey has some good solutions on what we could do about it.
He definitely does.
One thing we're going to do is talk about those solutions probably in upcoming episodes because it's fine and dandy to talk about this stuff, but it's, parents need options. And some of these parents, you're going to have to figure out a way and be a little bit innovative to figure out how you can do it because it's not easy. It's easier to send your kid, I guess, to the public school system, whether you drive them there yourself or they get on the bus. But the one thing here that Christopher Rufo speaks about is that it doesn't matter, really. Anything that is passed legally in the past, anything from the past that, looks at the content of one's character rather than the color of their skin. The first thing the critical race theorists want you to do is see color. Then once you see color, then things can be equitable, or at least they can get to a point where everything can be equitable, which means an equal outcome. So in theory, then all people could be white. But the one thing about all of this is that it's not necessarily it's a half-baked ideology and a propaganda ideology that would be set up by, you would think, like some party. And I mean political party. And so if you understand the logic, and I want to end with Tim Pool on this today, because if you understand the logic, what they are saying is that the whites and their ideology are so powerful that they can't be overcome. So in a sense, what they're talking about is white supremacy, right? I mean, whites are more powerful. They have dominated. We don't want them to dominate anymore. Oh, but they're still dominating. And how is anybody going to feel comfortable in their own skin when they have been taught and indoctrinated that the color of their skin matters more and that whites are the most supreme, apparently? Seems to me the real crux or the problem, the logical problem with critical race theory.
Now, I'm not too interested in rehashing the Cartoon Network story. Today's segment is about anti-racist classroom. In Sacramento, I want to explain to you exactly what anti-racist means. And I want to show you why I believe ultimately this is veiled white supremacy. Oh, I know. You've heard the word a million times, the phrase. I'm not saying this pseudo-garbage white supremacy that has a nebulous meaning. I mean quite literally, people who think white people for some reason are superior, be it white or non-white. They believe this. It is a leftist identitarian ideology. It's particularly fascinating to see so many news stories claim that the Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio, who is not a white man, is a non-white white supremacist, as if the Clayton Bigsby sketch from Dave Chappelle is a real thing. But I will tell you, there is something that I have seen that I would liken to some kind of envy. And I was told that simply by saying it, oh, they would get so triggered. But what else would you call it? When you have this viral video, I think I have it pulled up, where a young black woman and a young Asian man are complaining about how they're not white enough. And she says, you're closer to white than I'll ever be, as if it's something to strive for. Yeah, most of you probably know that I grew up in a mixed race family in a racially diverse neighborhood, and this never happened. We were never jealous of anybody based on what race they were. That wasn't a thing in our minds. But let's talk about what's happening in your schools. And I can show you the anti-racist classroom from Sacramento City Unified School District to explain why they are teaching your children to be white supremacists. They claim they are trying to make your children not racist. That's not true. They're trying to trigger what is called a white racial awakening. They say it all the time. They want your kids to see color. In the PSA from Cartoon Network, the little white girl says that it matters that she's white because her experience is different. That is laying the seeds. That's planting the seeds. They say, what do you mean? You're telling white people to recognize their white privilege is going to make them racist? Yes. Let me explain. Let me show you this, and it'll blow your mind. If you are someone who's familiar with this and you're interested, keep watching. And if you're someone who's never heard this before, let me break it down for you. But for everybody else and everybody in between, please share this with people to explain to them what is going on in our schools. Sacramento City Unified School District posted this September 29th, 2020. Anti-racist classroom. They say Sacramento City Unified School District is committed to a sustained journey of explicit and purposeful learning, reflection, and practice of eradicating systemic racism in our schools. While acknowledging there is no right path, we urge our community and educators to stay the course in having difficult conversations, even when it is uncomfortable. We have created an anti-racist classroom to support opportunities for the district community to learn, connect, and build its capacity to address racism and injustice. This includes providing an understanding. This includes providing an understanding of how racism impacts the lived experience of people of color and indigenous people, is systemic, and has been part of many foundational aspects of society throughout history, and can be manifested in both individual attitudes and behaviors, as well as formal and unspoken policies and practices within the institution. They say visit the anti-racist classroom resource at sites.google, SCUSD. Okay, I would like to show you the racial affinity group section, which should explain to you in no uncertain terms how they are trying to teach your children to be white supremacists. And again, I'm not using the hyperbolic leftist version. I mean, quite literally. Listen. They say, what and why racial affinity groups? Racial affinity groups offer a structure of inquiry and can address many needs. They support us in exploring what has been forbidden, forgotten, and unhealed. For example, in racial affinity groups, white people can discover together their group identity. They can cultivate racial solidarity and compassion and support each other in sitting with the discomfort, confusion, and numbness that often accompany white racial awakening. That is a verbatim quote from this page. Let me just explain it again. They say they are teaching your children this in Sacramento. White people can discover together their group identity. I ask you why.
It's a good question. It's a good question. Anytime you tribalize people off like this, they become their own small group, and they stop talking to one another. That's not what education is supposed to be. That is what segregation was. That was something that this country tried to overcome, and we're heading back to it. So we're gonna try and come up with some ways that parents, some strategies for parents. I'll definitely try and provide some links for people because there are some groups in the state that are onto this. But we need to move, I think, faster away from the district schools, from public education in North Carolina, especially in those districts that are putting into practice this stuff. Remember, they went through the SBE, I said in episode 4, to try and do away with some of this critical race theory stuff. But the individual counties are going to go ahead with it anyway. And Wake County Public School System is. Say no to segregation, folks. Walk away from the district public schools. Walk away from public education. Hang loose.